Hello and welcome back. Today we read a chapter called Imagination, chapter 6, and I decided after yesterday's performance, which was very disorganized and I didn't even really remember where the chapter went and what order it went in, I decided I was going to start taking notes. So I took just some really small bullet point notes just to kind of remind me of where the chapter went and things I wanted to talk about. So the chapter basically talks about imagination and how imagination is a form of energy and it's an impulse of thought, and it's not just this arbitrary thing, but it's actually a form of energy that can bring to life matter and a physical counterpart of the energy in the form of wealth, hopefully. So he talks about the two kinds of imagination, which are synthetic and creative. Synthetic is the most common version, which he says most people use to develop a plan to create riches. And it's basically just combining or synthesizing already had ideas into a new idea or a new thought or a new plan. And then there's creative imagination, which is, he says, kind of communication with the, what's he call it? Infinite intelligence. So that's kind of his word for maybe the universe or for God or for the higher power. But creative imagination is our communication with the vibrations of the ether and basically how we get ideas and imagination of different things that weren't already thought of out of seemingly nowhere. So subconscious communication with other people to some extent. Um, so then he goes on to tell a story about the Enchanted Kettle, which is basically his anecdote of how ideas and imagination can form into a plan and then form into immense wealth. So this Enchanted Kettle story was about this doctor who had a black kettle and a wooden spoon, and he was discussing some plot with a drugstore clerk, and he ultimately sold this kettle, wooden spoon, and a secret recipe on a piece of paper to, sorry, my phone's going off here, to the drugstore clerk for 500 bucks. And the drugstore clerk was worried because it was his life savings. The doctor was pretty happy because he got off with 500 bucks. And long story short, the imagination of that drugstore clerk turned that enchanted kettle into the company that is now known as Coca-Cola, which is a multi-billion dollar company and formed immense riches. So something how imagination and an idea can turn into wealth. The next story was about the Armor Institute of Technology. It was about this preacher who wanted to basically overhaul the educational system and form a school that allowed students to learn in kind of a more of a hands-on manner by actually doing versus just reading about things. So he needed $1 million to get this school started, and he didn't know how he was doing it, how he was going to do it, but he would lay in bed every night thinking about how he would form this school and all of his plans, and he had it all laid out in his head. All he needed was $1 million, and he didn't know how he would get it. And that went on for years, and then one night he decided that he was going to get this $1 million and he was going to create a sermon about his idea and preach it, and hopefully that someone in the crowd listening either knew somebody that would help or could give him $1 million. And lo and behold, he did this sermon and he had it all well planned out, and the second he put action to his desire, someone decided to give him $1 million. His name was Philip Armour, and it turned into a hugely successful school, bringing everybody lots of wealth, obviously, probably except the students who went there. Then he kind of talks about radio advertising. He goes on a bit of a tangent about radio advertising and how that is a good way to turn an idea into riches if you're so inclined, and basically how there's opportunity in radio advertising for converting listeners to buyers. So kind of a marketing idea, but obviously radio advertising probably isn't quite as relevant today, but maybe that's somebody's great idea that they're going to get rich off of. And then he kind of closes just talking about how ideas are strange in the way that You have them, and if you begin to take action on them and you start to give them life and nurture them a little bit, there will reach kind of this critical moment where the idea takes on a life of its own and it grows momentum and becomes powerful. And eventually, there feels like there's this breakthrough moment that life gave you this big break, but really, you created the big break by giving your idea life and giving action to your idea and nurturing that idea. So that's something that I think about all the time, and it's something that I've struggled with in the past, but it's the concept of imperfect action. And it's basically that doing something imperfectly is better than just sitting around and doing nothing and just having this idea in our head or ideas that we think are great ideas, but we never act upon it, and then we never have anything come of it. So that's kind of the closing thoughts. And then, of course, he finishes the chapter with a quote that he says earlier in the chapter again, which is success needs no explanation and failure allows no alibi. So basically, if you're successful, there's no need to explain yourself. And if you're a failure, there's no need to give a reason why. It's just kind of the way it is. So that's that today. Another long one. Sorry about that, but looking forward to chapter 7 tomorrow. Hope that you guys join me.